Well, a very good evening and welcome to this online launch of Unheard Voices, Reflections of a Prison Chaplain by Imelda Wickham. This is a book that, in the most benign way, it's described by one critic as written with warmth and understanding, challenge and encouragement, passion and compassion. Yet it throws down the gauntlet and challenges us to pull down the walls in the design of our societal punishment system. It calls for a restorative justice system with support and rehabilitation built into the penalty. It packs a big punch. As such, it's wonderful to use the facility of this online forum to bring Imelda's message to a wider audience, to open the conversation so people can understand, engage and discuss the themes of the book. I'm sure you're all looking forward to hearing the perspectives, however, of our guests and author this evening, so I'll move straight on. My name is Caroline Henry from Messenger Publications, publishers of the book and hosts for this event. I'll just give you a quick rundown of our schedule for this evening. First of all, our editor, Doyle SJ, will welcome you on behalf of Messenger Publications. Our speakers this evening are Mary Hanrahan and Pat Doyle, and we'll also hear from Imelda herself this evening. We plan to leave time for our panelists to answer some questions or comments that people might have. So if you do have a question or a comment, please type it into the box. You'll see it at the tab at the bottom of your screen, the chat box. And we hope to get to a selection of these after we've heard from our speakers. Just to let you know, we will be recording this launch, and tomorrow I'll send out a link to everybody who's requested a registration link. And I'll give you details of a flash special offer on the book in honour of the launch at the end of this evening. So without further ado, I welcome Doyle, editor of Messenger Publications, to speak. Doyle.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And welcome to everybody who has tuned in. I went out to a list of names there, a lot of very familiar names from years ago and also more recent, so you're very welcome. I'm here really on behalf of Cecilia West, who's the director of Messenger Publications now, who is on annual leave at the moment. So on her behalf, I welcome you. I'm very delighted with this book, Unheard Voices. When I got it from Imelda a number of months ago, I was very interested in it. I thought it was a very good book to make public. It's a very good text and gives us an insight into prison life that I think is very important in our work in the church and in the country. I'm not going to go into the book very much, but it begins a bit with her own story and her own getting into the prison chaplaincy, very impressive, and how it changed her as well as what she tried to do. And that's an essential contribution made to every chaplain. There's a lot of stories in it from prisoners that bring the themes really to light. Imprisoned on the outside, free on the inside. Where is he now? So many of them were writing about their families and missing their families. I won't go through them all, I'm sure somebody else may, but it brings to life anyway, the real life of people in prison. And often we're very immune to that. And she also has different times of the year that they write about, Christmas particularly. And amazing how many of them talk about their mother always visited them. And I think that's very true. Some of them were prisoners in Britain and then were in Ireland. So we're very happy to publish this in the Messenger. As you know, Messenger Publications are committed in the Jesuit way to anything in the area of justice and faith. I thank Imelda very much for writing it and for giving it to us. And it's selling well so far, and it'll sell a lot better by all of you when you buy it tonight, but it's well worth it. it's an interesting book as well, I would say, for teachers and catechists and chaplains in a school, because some of the themes in religious education have to do with prisoners. And also, I sent it down to Maynooth recently because some of these students there do placements in prison. So I thank you very much, Imelda, for writing it and for giving it to us. I thank Peter McVerry for his foreword. And then I want to thank the staff of Messenger who saw it from first typescript to this lovely book. That'll be Cecilia West, particularly our publisher and our director. Then to people intimately connected with it, like Paula Nolan, the designer, Kate Kiernan, who did all the proofreading, Carol Ann, who publicizes it, to the rest of the staff, Alan and Seamus, who make sure it goes out to people very quickly. Francis and Breed and Elizabeth upstairs taking in phone calls, ordering it and doing that sort of work, and Brendan, our designer, as well. So without further ado, I'd just like to start the evening. It'll be very instructive, I'd say. I'm delighted that Pat Doyle is here from the McVerry Trust. We're quite involved in the McVerry Trust, do a bit of funding for you. And also Mary Hanrahan, who will be speaking as well. So welcome, and I hope you both enjoy and find the evening valuable and instructive. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Donal. Now, may I introduce the first of our contributors for this evening, Mary Hanrahan. Presentation sister, Mary Hanrahan, is originally from County Kilkenny. She worked as a teacher and a principal in secondary education for 11 years before moving into provincial and congregational leadership. Mary served on the presentation congregational leadership team for 11 years. She then retrained as a chaplain and worked for 7 years as a chaplain in Cloverhill and Arbor Hill prisons. In August 2020, Mary was appointed provincial leader in the Northeast province of the congregation. Mary.
Good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be here this evening on the occasion of the launch of Imelda's book, Unheard Voices. I want to begin by quoting just one verse of a poem from Raphael Considine. They know her in the crowded, lonely ways, woman of welcoming heart, whose lantern shed kind beams for eyes waste misted by the weary miles. For them, her hands are open. For her, their doors. Room is made by dim and smoking fire, some small crust shared. And she, receiving, knows still more to give, and welcomed grows in art of welcoming. This poem was written to honour the life and mission of Nan O'Neill, who founded our presentation congregation in 1775. I quote it here tonight to honour the life and mission of our author, Imelda Wickham. Although divided by a span of almost 250 years, the poet could be describing Imelda's ministry. In the best and truest sense of the word, Imelda has followed in Nano's footsteps, never more closely perhaps than in the last 20 years, as she walked the crowded and lonely landings of Wheatfield Prison. The comfort and light which Nan O'Neill brought into the homes of the oppressed and poverty-stricken Catholics of 18th century Cork is mirrored for me in the comfort and light which Imelda brought on a daily basis to the lives of the men in prison. In his Easter message last year, Pope Francis said that what humanity most needed in the midst of the pandemic were people who would be gateways of hope and transformation. Imelda has certainly been this beacon of hope for the prisoners in Ireland, and throughout her time as a chaplain in the prison service has sought to be an agent of transformation. Unheard Voices, which we are launching here tonight, is another important step on this transformative journey. When the 18-year-old girl from County Wexford joined the presentation congregation, she could never have imagined that she'd spend a large portion of her life behind bars. I smile when I read in her book, "At heart, I'm still 18." Any of us who know Imelda know the truth of this statement, as her tireless pursuit of the next best step for those in custody and their families is always to the forefront of her thoughts and actions. Like Nano before her, Imelda trusted the Spirit to lead her in her prison ministry, and to quote from her book, "Insofar as I know, the Spirit never let me down." The nudgings of that same Spirit have now led Imelda to reach out to the families of those in prison by setting up a unique service called New Directions. As presentation sisters, we are called to be constantly on the alert for the most forgotten and marginalized in our society, and to empower them to find their voice. The reflections in part 2 of Unheard Voices give that voice to the suffering and heartbreak experienced by the family members of those in custody, as well as to the experience of the prisoners themselves. I want to finish by sharing that I have been privileged to work alongside Imelda as a prison chaplain. To say that her style of chaplaincy was a challenge to me as a new raw recruit is indeed an understatement. On one occasion, as I helped with the choir in Wheatfield, Imelda was returning after a family bereavement. The men had managed to buy a bouquet of flowers for her, and I clearly remember what was said to her as the flowers were presented. "Imelda, there are not enough flowers in the whole world to tell you how much we think of you." This sums up the quality of the relationship which Imelda had with the men and the difference which she made. Imelda, tonight, on behalf of the congregation, I want to congratulate you on the launch of Unheard Voices and to tell you that we are proud to call you sister and to acknowledge the difference which you have made and the voice which you continue to be for some of the most silent and forgotten people in our society. Thank you, Imelda.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. Lovely words. Now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Pat Doyle. Pat has worked in disadvantaged communities with vulnerable young people for 32 years. A graduate of Milltown Institute and NUI Maynooth, he has a higher diploma and a master's in education. Throughout his career, Pat has worked in the area of social inclusion, managing a range of initiatives, projects and organisations that work with marginalised young people at risk of homelessness and addiction, and those within residential care settings and criminal justice institutions. In 2005, Pat was appointed as the first CEO of Peter McVerry Trust, the homeless and housing charity, a position he has held ever since. Pat is the current president of the Irish Council for Social Housing and is also a member of the Department of Housing's High-Level Housing Delivery Group and the High-Level Task Force on Homelessness. He was appointed by the Minister for Justice to the Judicial Conduct Committee in July 2020, and we're delighted to have him here this evening. Pat.
Thank you, Caroline. Imelda, congratulations, and thank you for asking me to speak. I know you don't like tributes and you don't like too many people talking about you. Mary has said so much and said it so well, but you're going to have to sit back and hear it all again now and suck it up, as they say in the prison. Imelda, it's a pleasure to be here. What do you think of when you think of Imelda? Courageous, strong, steadfast, funny, committed, generous, thoughtful, caring, and insightful. And that's just what I think. Many of you who know Imelda will have your own thoughts and views of Imelda, and much of what I have said will resonate with you. But I have no doubt when we go inside Wheatfield Prison and we ask the lads to say what they think of Imelda, they will mirror what I have said. That is the general view of Imelda Wickham. Imelda never ceases to amaze me. She is always forward thinking, always has a vision, always has a project, always has something else to do. When Imelda makes up her mind to do something, you may get on board. Not to get on board, you may get out of the way because it's going to happen anyway. I learned that very early on when I met Imelda. I spent many years trying to catch up with her on some of her projects, and sometimes I think I'm still catching up with Imelda. When you get a phone call from Imelda, it's met with two feelings, one of excitement and one of terror. What have I not done? What have I forgotten to do? It's always a pleasure working with Imelda. Imelda doesn't waste time. It's like she's on a mission. My children have never met Imelda, but they feel they know Imelda. They admire Imelda. They're proud of Imelda. And that's just from what I have told them about her achievements. And the common thing they say to me when I go home and say, oh, Imelda's writing a book, which is exactly the way Imelda said it one day. I'm thinking of writing a book. Imelda, the kids say, how old is she? Because it seems like she's been achieving things forever. Imelda is a fantastic asset to the Presentation Sisters, and they are a fantastic asset to her. It's a team effort. She has blossomed in the Presentation Sisters, and they have blossomed with her. She's a great asset for the prison service, a great asset for the Irish chaplaincy service. She went on to become the head of the chaplaincy service at one point in her 20 years in the prisons. But most of all, she's a great voice and a great asset for some of the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, and the most excluded in our society. Those who end up in prison, those who are on the outside, those who are on the edge, those who are excluded. Imelda had a stunning career in the Presentation Sisters and went all the way to become Provincial, just like Mary has. And had done that before she decided to retrain and become a chaplain. Imelda made inquiries, traveled to Canada, trained, came home and took up the job as a chaplain and did that in 1999. She did that the same year and the same month that I took up a role of working with ex-prisoners in the Bond project in Blanchardstown. That was a project for the reintegration of prisoners. I didn't meet her till 4 years later, but I'd heard so much about her work in the prisons over those 4 years. Imelda has a deep conviction and belief in God. She follows the scripture of whatever you do to the least of my brothers, that you do to me. And she does that so well. And that other piece of scripture from St. Mark's Gospel, Matthew's Gospel, which talks about when I was in prison, you visited me. Imelda lives that gospel every day. Imelda never really wanted to retire from the prisons, I don't think. And I think if COVID hadn't come in, she would have found a way to stay in there. I'm so happy that she did in some ways, because that gave her time to work on her next project. Mary alluded to it there, and I'll talk about it in a moment. If you haven't read the book by now, go out and read it. It's a small, simple book, very deeply written, funny at times, but has great insights and gives voice to the most marginalized. Although not the main goal of the book, in the early part, you get real insights about Imelda, generally a private person, but the book gives us little snippets of who she is and what she deeply believes in. And all through the first part of the book, you hear her core values come to light. Peter McVerry, who needs no introduction, wrote a fabulous forward in the book on page 5 to 7. He talks about his views of the justice system. He talks about his views of prisoners, which are very, very similar to Imelda. And they too have shared a journey together. Imelda and Peter established in Wheatfield the Trail Project. Although she was in the prison and worried about those in custody, she worried about what happened to when they left. And so she set up the Trail Project, an aftercare project for prisoners. Peter says she set it up. She said they set it up. I don't know. The truth is somewhere in the middle. But that project has gone from strength to strength. And Imelda, I want to thank you for entrusting the Peter McVerry Trust with your baby, that project, one of your babies, and giving it to us. It continues to go on from strength to strength. And sometimes when it lets somebody down, I get that phone call from Imelda, just reminding me how much better we could do at times. And it's always said gently and always accepted. Reading, as Donald said, the table of contents, you see the areas Imelda wants to focus on: the loneliness, the isolation, the loss, the lack of compassion. Peter too refers in the forward about who is she talking about. She's talking about the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, but they too are complex. They've had traumas, they've had challenges long before they ever got to the gates of Wheatfield. The book captures the pain, the struggle, the challenges, the loneliness, the abandonment of all those she worked with. She gives voice to those struggles. She has done that all her life, and she continues to do it now in this book. The book offers us an invitation to begin a conversation, both internally and externally, both locally and nationally. It asks what needs to change about the system. How can we bring about change? Do we want a better, more inclusive society? And if so, then it starts with looking after the most vulnerable and the most marginalized. This book is also a resource, as Mary referred to, a resource to transition your students who all the time have to do a project on some element of society. Why not do it on this? It's also a resource for academics, for those doing master's and doctorate programs. Why? Because it tells you, gives you a real insight of the struggles and the loneliness and the challenges of the most vulnerable. It's also a resource to trainee chaplains, trainee prison officers, trainee probation officers, to incoming ministers for justice, incoming ministers for health. Half the people in prison have health issues and should be in healthcare facilities, not in prison. And it's also a great resource for incoming Taoiseachs. And I think we should start by sending one to Micheál and in time Leo. It is a rare teaching resource that gives us great insights and calls on us to start a conversation. It calls on us to reflect, and it calls on us to promote change. Finally, nowadays, Imelda is outside the prison walls, but much of her is inside the prison walls. When you talk to her, you very clearly, very quickly get to understand that she still worries, she's still concerned, she's still longing to know how the lads are doing in Wheatfield Prison. I've no doubt that much of her prayers every day are for those lads. She now has moved on to that project that Mary talked about, the New Directions Project, which tries to give light and give a voice to those who are the families of prisoners. We talk about victims and perpetrators, but families of prisoners are often very much victims too. And they carry a hidden loneliness, a hidden struggle, worrying about those on the inside. And Imelda has set up a counselling service, a support service, an advice service for families of prisoners. These are silent, unheard voices too, who are living outside the walls, but are very much trapped by those inside the walls. Her strength, her caring way, her listening skills All those skills she used in the prison, she's now using them outside the prison. I have no doubt if Imelda continues to have good health, is given time, there's a second book in Imelda Wickham about the voices, the unheard voices of the families of prisoners. That could be part 2, Imelda. Finally, I want to thank Imelda for this wonderful book, for starting this wonderful conversation. I want to thank you for taking the time to capture the experiences. I want to thank you on behalf of those in the prisons, both the staff and the prisoners, for giving voice to what's going on in there, to just that whole experience, for sharing those insights and shining a light. I want to thank the presentation sisters for sharing Imelda with all of us. I want to thank the messenger for publishing the book. And I want to thank you, Imelda, for being you and for allowing me to be part of tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. That was a truly lovely presentation. I'm sure Imelda's ears are burning, but I'm now going to introduce you to Imelda Wickham, PBVM. Imelda, as many of you will know, was a prison chaplain for 20 years and held the role of National Coordinator of Prison Chaplains for 3 years. She's a founding member of TRAIL, which Pat has just spoken about, Transitional Residential Accommodation for Independent Living, which is the project designed to help homeless people leaving prison. She's currently involved in establishing a support service for the families of people in prison called New Directions. Again, Pat alluded to that. A friend and colleague of Imelda's, Nuala Kelly, described her admiration for Imelda in a way that I think is worth sharing here. She said, Imelda was courageous in how she always tried to bring issues within the prison to a wider audience, which entailed much hard work and unseen work, but she also had the guts to face down power with truth, both internally and across the wider society. Some testament. Imelda, I'm going to pass over to you now.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you all very much for joining us this evening for the launch of Hidden Voices. Thank you, Pat, for doing the actual launch so graciously, and to you, Mary, for representing the congregation here this evening, and indeed for your kind words. I'm not too sure that they're all deserved, but maybe to say, when you talk about my journey, I would have to say that I was never on that journey alone. Many of you here this evening have been partners with me on the journey, and without your help, support, and advice and expertise, none of these things would have happened. So tonight is not just about me, but about all of us gathered here this evening, as well as the unheard voices that are unable to be here. When I began to write the book, I had no idea what I was going to say. But by the time I got to the end of it, I knew exactly what I needed to say. Time out from the busyness of prison life afforded me the time and space to reflect and to let the experience of the past 20 years mellow into fruitfulness. While writing the book, the reality of the past 20 years slowly but surely became just a memory. And as the memory went on, the memory became increasingly more worrying. And I began to question the very justice of the criminal justice system. It is a system that I believe is in radical need of updating to bring it into line with the latest in cognitive, forensic, behavioral, and developmental branches of psychology, and into line with the new insights available to us from moral and ethical theology, and definitely into line with that deep, compassionate understanding that we are capable of as a society when we find the courage to face systemic problems. One has to ask, how just is it to criminalize mental illness? How just is it to criminalize an addiction, whatever that addiction may be? How just is it that the vast majority of people who populate our prisons come from areas of poverty and deprivation, or indeed homelessness, while society rarely if ever questions the criminality that underpins an unjust and unequal society. The poor and disadvantaged are no more prone to evil than any of us. Life's circumstances play a major part in the paths we choose to follow, and sometimes it is a path that some are unable to escape from. As I reflected on these matters and on how we deal with the issue of crime and the effectiveness of how we deal with it, it seemed to me that imprisonment is seen as the only option, while way back in 1985, the Whittaker Report recommended, and I quote, that imprisonment be used as a measure of last resort. A recommendation that has been, for the most part, politely and consistently ignored. The setting up of the National Commission on Restorative Justice and the publication of its final report in 2009 stated, and again I quote, on the basis of its considerations, the Commission is unanimous in its recommendation to the Minister for Justice, Equality and Law Reform that a restorative perspective be introduced nationally into the Irish criminal justice system, end of quote. That restorative perspective has to be the foundation of any criminal justice system, and as long as it is missing, there is no true justice. It remains a legalistic approach which denies the very humanity of all involved in crime. In my view, restorative justice has huge potential in addressing the needs of the victim and indeed the perpetrators of crime, as well as for society at large. And its underuse is regrettable, to say the least. We are stuck in an adversarial, punitive legal system which demands that the offender pay back their debt to society while depriving them of the very means to do so. That there may be other ways of making reparation and restitution and restoring right relationships has never been adequately explored. As we all know, the political system will only bring about change when forced by public opinion. Unfortunately, public opinion is not always well informed. But if we begin a conversation where all are included and all voices are listened to and respected, especially those who have experience of the criminal justice system, and where the dignity, humanity, and experience of people is respected, the way forward will be found. My sense of hope that it will be found is summed up in the final sentence of the last chapter of Hidden Voices. And again, I quote, the conversation will explore new, creative, and just ways of dealing with crime and punishment. It will explore a more holistic approach that will minimize the terrible effects of imprisonment on the incarcerated and on their families, especially children. Central to the story must be the victims of crime, victims who suffer life-changing trauma with no possibility of redress, except a court decision that aims to give an expression of justice being done. Victims and perpetrators are intrinsically linked, but linked destructively by the current criminal justice system. This needs to change, and change radically. Change calls for courage, and radical change calls for radical courage. We cannot pay lip service to an unworkable system, and we do so at the cost to society and to future generation of our citizens. So let us not give up or lose hope. And with those few words, I would now like to say a few words of thanks to a number of people who are on the journey with me. And I suppose two voices, I would call them not so hidden voices, prompted me to continue writing this book and not to give up. And I suppose one was my now departed friend and colleague, Imelda, who, without realizing it, commissioned this book almost as a last will and testament. The other voice was the ever-present friend and mentor, Patricia Kennedy, without whose encouragement, this book might never have seen the light of day. So thank you, Patricia. To my partner in crime, Peter McVerry. Peter, thank you for writing the foreword to the Hidden Voices and for making your own voice heard over so many years. To Maria Keenan for her advice and encouragement, thank you, Marie. To my ever supportive family of origin and my presentation family, I simply say, thank you for being part of who I am and what I do. To the editor and staff of Messenger Publication, I say thank you one and all, with a special thank you to Carol Ann for organising and taking us through this evening's proceedings. And finally, to those of you who joined us this evening and whose voices unfortunately were muted, do please join the conversation and initiate one where it is not happening. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Imelda. Very, very, very powerful words there. I think everybody will agree. I'm sure your ears are burning, but we aren't finished with you yet. As I said at the beginning, we're hoping that this is kind of initiating a conversation, that the book is a reach out. There's a reason you wrote it and you want to bring it forward. So a couple of questions had come in. I'm going to address the first one to you. How do you initiate? How do you think you can initiate that conversation in order to, make change? What can be done?
I think the conversation has already begun. People are reading the book, we're talking about it, discussing it. People are contacting me, and I think too that deep down people do realize that something has to change. And at the end of the day, that change will only be about when we all put our shoulders to the wheel and make sure that it happens. So I think the conversation has already begun, and hopefully tonight is another step on the journey. And I think when all of us put our heads together and come together and begin to talk, because I think conversation is the way forward. It's not about highlighting the failures and the misdemeanors of people. I think it's about talking about human nature, about humanity, about restoring right relationships, all of these things. I think deep down we all believe in these principles and these values. And I think when we come together and share the values, the change will come about.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions that came in on the similar theme. What basically did you learn maybe about yourself? That you made some reference in the book. You said, this is what prison did to me and for me. When accompanying, I am accompanied. Do you feel that you gained insight? Did you learn something about yourself in the process of writing this book?
Yes, I certainly did. I think I went in with very preconceived ideas and maybe quite judgmental. And but I think when I went in and met the people on a daily basis and got to know them and got to know their families and came to realize that these were just ordinary people. And very often when I sat in a prison cell with somebody, I would have said to myself, I could just as well be sitting in his place and he's sitting in mine. And I think I learned a lot about human nature, about the strengths and the ability of human nature, and also about its weaknesses. And I think when we meet that in other people, we recognize it in ourselves. I came to recognize the weaknesses in myself, just as they had weaknesses in them. And I think sometimes in sharing that, we both came to realize what our strengths were. And I think that's what enabled us to keep going and to work together. And I think I learned a lot from the families of people in prison. When I saw those people continuing to visit the prison year in, year out, some for a long, long time, as we know, imprisonment is intergenerational, and some of these people had been coming for years, and they continue to come. And that reminded me of the unconditional love of God. There's no other way you can describe it. Donald mentioned there about the mothers, and that is true. And it's just that unconditional love that they showed by continuing to visit loved ones in prison. I also learned a lot from those who had nobody to visit them. And there are many, many people in prison who don't have anybody to visit. They never get a phone call, they never get a Christmas card, there is nobody there. And again, when I sat with these men and saw how they were coping with this and how they lived life, some of them living life to the full, that had a tremendous influence on me. If they can do that, what can I do? You know, they were stripped of everything. They had no friends, no family, nobody, and yet they lived life. And They went about the daily life in the prison, sometimes with great good humour. They helped other people. They tried to better themselves. They expressed guilt and remorse for what they had done, knowing that it wasn't going to make any difference that they did so. So really, I was very moved by these people and definitely changed by all of them over the years. I would say that the 20 years I spent in prison were the most fruitful of my whole life.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. There are a lot of very positive comments in the chat box, not that many questions, so you're not going to be put too much in the spot. But I have one other question that I think is probably quite pertinent, and you know, the answer will be an interesting one. You state there in your book that you've never met an evil person. How do you account for evil in our society, among us? How do you account for the evil that we see?
I never met an evil person. For me, evil exists, but it's not in the person. And I think we're all capable of great good. We're also capable of doing evil deeds. And when I do an evil deed, it doesn't make me an evil person. I'm still the same person. And, you know, I often pointed that out to the men when they come in, particularly when they come in first, they're very broken, maybe having gone through a very public, vindictive criminal trial, and they're not feeling at their best, as you can imagine, and they probably feel themselves that they're very evil people, and particularly what's written about them in the media at times. And I would always say to that person, look, you are still the same person you were before you did this. Obviously you did wrong, it is wrong, it shouldn't have happened, it did happen. But it doesn't make you an evil person. You are still that same person, created by God in his image and likeness. So there is no question that you're evil. And I think once we believe in the innate goodness of people, I think that's the starting point in any conversation that we're going to have. That innate goodness is always there, regardless of what we do. If I do something good, it doesn't make me a good person. If I do something evil, it doesn't make me an evil person. And I think we've got to move beyond that and move beyond the victimization, or the demonization, if you like, of people, and to see them as they're still human people, needing to be treated with dignity and respect, and asking or imploring, if we like, that we see them as human beings, the same people that they were before this happened, and to recognize their deep humanity. And, you know, I think we've got to recognize our weaknesses and our strengths. They're both part of all of us. So I can honestly stand over that. I've never, ever in all my life met an evil person. And I don't think such exists. There is evil in society, but it's not within the people. It's around us, but we can overcome it with goodness.
Right, right. Powerful words again. I have one more question actually here that's just come in. Imelda, why do you think that as a society we have such a lack of empathy for prisoners in Ireland? How can we start to remedy this?
I think, first of all, I suppose most people have no idea of what it's like to be in prison. Very few people get a chance to visit a prison. You can come in to visit, but very few people get, I would say, a privilege to walk among the people in prison and to see that they're just ordinary people like ourselves. The lack of empathy, I think, is sometimes fueled by fear. The media, while I'd say the media do great work and have done over the years, and I think many of them continue to do it, but there is a small cohort of media who I think inspire fear into people and maybe highlight the dangers and the awfulness of the crime. And while that has to happen, I think it shouldn't be pinned onto people so much. I think when people, I think empathy comes when we actually meet the person. And without meeting them, I often said to people in prison, you know, when they talk about what is written about them in the paper, or families ring me up, maybe tell me what has been said about their son or their daughter and how to cope with that. I would always say the person who wrote that has never met you. They don't know you. Maybe if they got to meet you and to see who you really are, that empathy would come. That's the only way that it can come. I also think maybe people don't reflect enough on human nature and on humanity and on all of our, like, maybe they don't reflect enough on their own weaknesses and to say they're going for the grace of God. It could be any of us. So I think the empathy will come with understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another interesting question here. Who would you like to see read this book? Who would you like this book to be put in front of? How can we help in that way?
I think Pat outlined quite a few places there where the book would be of value. My hope is that it will be read, and that it will be read with a sense of compassion, and maybe a sense too of wanting to really know what goes on within the prison. I mean, I think I said in the book that few people get to see what really happens. A lot of good things happen within the prison as well. It's not all about locking people up and mistreating them. Lots of good things. I mean, on a daily basis within the prison, it's just like any ordinary community. And I would say there was a sense of community in that prison, and a sense of where people try to help each other. Obviously, it was a difficult place to be. It could be fraught at times. There could be high tensions, but on the whole, I think we're all there as community members of staff, prison management, people committed to the prison, and other people coming in to visit. So I think I think the more people who read the book, the better they will understand what it's like. And also the little reflections at the end of the book. Obviously, the first part of the book is outlining my vision for change. And I hope they will read that and join the conversation, be part of that fight for change, because really we're going to have to fight for this. It's not something that's going to be handed on us. And maybe I would say to the media, give us a break now and again, and highlight the good things that are happening, and highlight the good things that our people are trying to do, and highlight what restorative justice, the type of justice that would bring. If the media would take that on board, it would be great help. So I hope that people will read this book, be moved by it, and be energized to bring about that change, and to begin to see the prisoner in new light. And in doing that, they're going to make the whole of society a safer place to be.
Yeah. We're having a few more questions popping in now, and I don't want to exhaust you, but there's a couple of interesting points here. Did you find that there was an openness, Lily O'Reilly is asking, among the prison officials to your idea of reform and change? You know, you brought this idea. Was that accepted? Was that welcomed?
I would think so. I think anyone working within the prison system would be constantly looking at how they could improve it. And I think anybody working within that system would welcome change. And obviously, it's not an easy place to work either. And so I think there would be an openness. And over the years, I mean, I've written many prison reports, and I think people are used to me saying this kind of thing. And I've never experienced any animosity towards me because of that. I think there's an openness, and I think many of these people will really join in the conversation, and they're as enthusiastic about bringing about change, because many of them would have spent their lives trying to improve the quality of life within the prison and helping people. So I think we're all committed, really, we're all on the same journey, maybe coming at it from different perspectives and different angles. But I think that's the richness of any debate or any conversation, that we all see from our own perspectives. And I think many people will be happy to join in the conversation and to be part of it.
Right, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And I think finally we'll just take this as our last question, and maybe it may not be one that you have the answer to at your fingertips. It's a cost thing. Do you think it would cost more to have a compassionate justice system? And if not, why don't we have one, is the question from John Pilo. And where can we continue to have the conversations? But I suppose the interesting point there is, do you perceive that there would be a significant additional cost to the kind of system that you envision?
I haven't worked out the economics of it.
Yeah.
But I would say it would cost less ultimately, because less people will end up in prison. I think many of the people who are now in prison don't need to be there, so we'd have less people in prison. And also the outcomes would be greater. So less people will be going to prison. I think the cost would be significantly reduced, and the human cost and the psychological cost and the social cost would certainly be much less.
Yeah. So you have to look at the longer term. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we'll take you off the spot now, if that's probably okay with you. And I think we'll probably call our evening bring our evening to a close. I suppose I'd just like to say a huge thank you to everybody for attending, to our panelists, to Imelda, our author, and indeed our Q&A session. I think there's given us a lot to reflect on, and a real appetite then maybe to explore the book further and maybe bring it to the attention of decision makers in the judicial system. So for the night that's in it, we do have a special offer on Unheard Voices. It's on our online bookstore. We're offering a 20% discount, which will run for the rest of the week. So you can avail of it online in our bookshop, or you can call the messenger offices directly and somebody order it by phone if you'd prefer. So that will run until the weekend, including the weekend. Then tomorrow I will email everybody who requested a registration link. Not everybody managed to attend, I think, this evening. There were a couple of late applications, but I'll send everybody who's emailed me a link to the recording. So those who missed it will be able to watch it, and those who attended might watch it again or share it. So again, it just remains for me to thank the panelists and also our attendees for participating and enjoying and joining us this evening. It has been a very, very interesting, worthwhile and enjoyable evening. Thank you all very much indeed. And I'll say good night.